Hello to everyone listening. I'm Jo Francis, CoramBAAF's publishing manager, and today I'm talking to Elaine Dibben about the book Adoption by Foster Carers. This is a new, fully updated edition of a book in our popular Good Practice Guide series. Elaine wrote the book along with her co-author, Viv Howarth. Elaine is an independent social work consultant and also chairs adoption and fostering panels. She has a great deal of experience in the sector and has written on various subjects, including adoption assessment and parent and child fostering. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you, Jo. Nice to be here.
So, Elaine, your book explores adoption by foster carers. How common is this, and does it get the attention it deserves?
Well, that's a really good question, Jo. And I think it's difficult to answer how common it is. It's never easy to gather statistics. We know that in the past, probably foster carers adopting has been sort of between about 10 and 15% of the adoptions that took place. Unfortunately, in more recent years, in terms of trying to get the statistics, those statistics have now been skewed because where children are being adopted following being placed in early permanence placements, where they're placed with a foster carer who's then going to adopt them, the statistics don't differentiate between a foster carer who's a short-term foster carer who adopts and then an early permanence carer. So it's not really possible now to kind of try and work that out, but certainly in the past what we know is it was probably 10 to 15% of adoptions was where a child was being adopted by their foster carer. And in terms of whether it gets the attention it deserves, I don't think it does. I think that there's a lot of myths and misunderstandings really about foster carers who want to adopt and the kind of benefits of that and how that should be viewed in terms of whether that's appropriate for the child. So I think that in the past, I think it tended to be that people saw adoption and fostering very differently. There was quite a lot of suspicion of foster carers who then decided that they wanted to adopt a child that they were fostering. And we know from talking to foster carers that many of them received quite negative responses when they put their views forward and said that they'd like to adopt the child that they were caring for, you know, particularly from sort of social workers, sometimes from the fostering teams themselves. So I think over time it's been quite a misunderstood route to adoption, really.
I see what you mean. I mean, we know that adoption by foster carers can be a great option for some children in care to gain a permanent home, but I imagine there can be challenges as well as benefits to this route.
Absolutely, but I think just wanting to start with the positives, really. So the positive is that the child remains, and we'll hear from Isla, you know, the child that she was fostering, you know, she had the child from 6 months, and that child will not have any further moves. You know, that child will stay in the family where they become settled and they've got established relationships. And so, you know, I think, you know, we talk a lot about the importance of trying to minimise moves for children. And I think adoption by a foster carer absolutely means that a child is going to stay where they are. They maintain those relationships with the foster carer and with the wider foster carer family. And certainly for older children, it means they can stay in their same schools, that they can retain their friendship groups, you know, the clubs that they go to. So, you know, there's an awful lot for a child in terms of being able to remain where they are happy and where they are settled and where they feel secure.
Definitely.
Those are the sort of real positives. There's also, I think, the fact that often, and again, that was discussed by Isla, that there can be some very positive relationships formed between foster carers and the birth family members of the child that they're caring for. And so there's a sort of strong possibility of those relationships being able to be maintained in whatever way is appropriate as they move through into adoption. And I think that's also a real strength. The challenges, I guess, are because originally, obviously, the foster carers didn't come into the situation that they find themselves in, wanting to adopt a child. So there will be a whole lot of changes that they will need to think about. But also, when the social workers were originally placing the child with the foster carers, they may not have given as much thought to the geography of the placement where it was in relation to birth family members. And foster carers, sometimes, you know, fostering is their sort of main job, their main source of income. And so in moving to thinking about adopting a child that's with them, they have to kind of think about all those other things in terms of whether they continue fostering in their sort of main role, you know, what that means for them financially. So there are a lot of things that need to be thought through, both by the foster carers and by the social workers that are working with them.
So it's a real change of expectations on all sides, but Of course, it can be
Yeah,
very positive for the child.
but absolutely with the benefits sort of at the forefront, really, of thinking how the child is going to benefit from this more than anything else, really.
And of course, it is the child's best interests that should be the most important thing here. So, a really strong point of the book is the way that you've based it on the actual views of foster carers who have adopted and social worker views. You interviewed numerous carers and workers about their experiences. What did you learn from this process?
I think the absolute key thing that comes from talking with foster carers is that the motivation that they have for putting themselves forward to adopt is the relationship that they've built up with the child. And often that will have surprised them. You know, some of the foster carers that we talk to have been fostering for a number of years, and they've moved many children on into adoption, back to their birth family members. Talked about this particular child that had just meant something more to them, really, that there was an extra bond there that led them to feel that actually this was a child that they didn't want to move on, that they wanted to sort of, they wanted to keep forever. And I think, interestingly, sometimes those foster carers had supported children through health procedures. They felt very protective about what the children had already been through. So they did feel quite strongly that the child shouldn't have any more moves, that they needed people who knew and understood them and understood some of the things that they'd already been through during the time that they'd been living in the fostering family. Some foster carers don't put themselves forward initially, but it may be as a result of an adoption placement that falls through that they then feel that actually they can't see the child going through any more moves, any more disappointments, and that's the point at which they then put themselves forward. But I think whatever the reasons, it's always very much child focused and based on what they feel is the right thing for the child.
Right, I see. There's certainly some fascinating evidence in the book as well, I noted, from legal cases. And the new edition updates these legal cases right up to the present day. So, what do these legal cases of foster carers adopting tell us about the way local authorities and RAAs handle adoption by foster carers?
I think all of the cases that we've talked about, both previously and the newer ones that we've updated the book with, highlight that there's often a lot of misunderstanding in terms of all of the people who are involved in these processes. So you might have social workers who aren't clear about kind of the processes they need to use, and Isla made some reference to that. There are situations where courts have dealt with things wrongly as well, and those are some of the cases that we've given examples of. And the difficulty, of course, is that where correct processes aren't followed, then that introduces further delays for the child and for the family that are obviously not in anybody's best interests. I mean, there's one particular case that we've got, which is in the newer version, which is about a foster carer who put themselves forward to adopt a child that had been in their care. The child had 3 older siblings, and originally the local authority had supported the child remaining with her foster carer for adoption, but then there was a change of plan, and that was going to involve the child being removed from the foster carers and placed with her older siblings, and being returned to country of origin outside of the UK. When the court granted the appeal, and they said that there was no reason why the requirement to consider the relationships that there are with the child's family members continuing should not also extend to other relationships identified by the courts as relevant, and including a relationship with a foster carer, that where a child, particularly a child of a particular age, had formed a strong bond with the carer, it was in the child's interest for the court to consider the likelihood and value of that relationship continuing. And I think that's really important and really highlights the value that the law kind of recognises of the strength of that relationship between the child and their foster carer when people are making plans for that child.
Absolutely. I can see that that's a key section within the book that I can imagine social workers may find it very useful to look at that.
And I think the other thing that comes from that really is just that it's so important that that social workers involve their legal teams from an early point in the where it becomes clear that a foster carer is wanting to put themselves forward to adopt, that there are discussions with legal teams about what's the right route for that, because there are different routes that foster carers can make direct applications to court, or it can go through as an agency adoption. I know that there's some case law that would show that courts tend to prefer that it goes through as an agency adoption, where the foster carer is approved as an adoptive parent first of all, and then the child is placed with them as an agency adoption. But there are there are other routes, and I think it's really important that social workers get early advice from their legal teams about what's the way to go forward, and that everybody that's involved understands those processes.
I can see that's really sage advice. After all, this is a complex area. Practical terms, then, some of the issues social workers could consider when they are assessing foster carers who want to adopt, they are similar issues to those they would consider for anyone else. But your book does identify some key differences when assessing carers to adopt. So what should workers consider in this area?
I think where they have to start really is what's the foster carer's motivation,
Yeah.
and understanding that that will be very different from if you like a mainstream adopter, that foster carers aren't generally coming into fostering so that they can add a child to their family, so that they can offer a child a sort of lifelong placement, and often, you know, they may well have their own children already, so they're not seeking to become parents. So the motivation will be very much related to this specific child and the particular situation around that child and the things that they've, you know, experienced since the child's been placed with them. So it's really important that people start with that and understand the story and the motivation behind the foster carer's wish to adopt. Then there will be some of the other issues that have come, we've already mentioned, really, the fact that there's going to be quite a significant change in the foster carer's circumstances. They're going to have to consider things like whether it's going to be appropriate for them to continue to foster. They may not have further accommodation. It may well be that people feel that the child needs time to settle, and may never kind of respond to other children coming in and out of the home if the foster care is going to continue to foster. So those things need to be thought about. Inevitably, for some carers, if fostering is their main job, if you like, then there will be issues around sort of financial support. Now, the legislation that we have in place allows there to be a cushion of financial support, so that local authorities can continue to pay foster carers for the equivalent of their fostering allowance for the first 2 years after the adoption goes through, and that gives people that chance really to kind of relook at their own lives and sort of think about how they would see things moving forward, but with that sort of financial cushion while they do that, really. And so you know, that's something that local authorities need to think about at an early point. And then I think the other thing is just thinking about other family members. So if there are other children in the family, they may be quite young children that have been living with the child and very much see them as part of the family now, but they might be older children who are no longer in the home. And of course, you know, when a foster carer is going to adopt a child, that's, you know, that is a sort of a lifetime commitment. It'll change things in terms of inheritance for other family members. So all of those things need to be thought through, and, you know, and depending on the age of other family members, and, you know, that need to be discussed with them, really, so that everybody's clear that there's going to be support for this for the child going forward.
Of course, I can see all those are very important things to consider. As a layperson, I assumed that the matching process would be relatively easy for foster carers adopting a child in their care, but your book identifies some important issues here as well. What do social workers need to think about around matching?
Well, again, as we've already said, I think the fact that this wasn't the original plan for the child, and it also wasn't the original plan for the carers. So I think that what social workers need to do is look at the individual situation and think about kind of what's best for the child, but also think about what other supports need to be put in place for the foster carers. So, for example, you know, foster carers are given quite limited information sometimes about the children that they're looking after, and that's kind of appropriate in terms of sort of issues around confidentiality for birth family members. But obviously, if they're moving into thinking about adoption of the child, then they need to have full information, really, about the child's history, about the health issues that there might be for the child based on both their sort of pre-birth experiences and other kind of things that are known in terms of the extended family. There might be health issues that need to be thought about. So it's really important before the foster carer kind of moves to making their final decision about whether this is right for them and their family, that they have got all of the information that they need to make that decision. And then I think there are potentially, you know, there may be issues that come up in terms of where the foster carer is living. If there are concerns about the fact that they are near to where family members live, then there needs to be some risk assessment about whether that poses any risks for the child and for the family. It doesn't necessarily need to rule out adoption as appropriate, and there are examples of where foster carers have actually moved home and moved area because it's felt that it's too risky for them to remain in the area where they're living. So all of these things need to be openly thought about and discussed with them, really. But I think it's important to have those conversations rather than to see things as an automatically kind of ruling this out as an option, that everybody needs to be involved in thinking about what that might mean for the child and for the family.
Yes, I can see things are quite complex here, and it really does take discussion. One more question here. Of course, joint working is important in this area between fostering agencies and adoption agencies and within RAAs themselves. Have you got any tips for this for social workers?
I mean, I think one of the issues that there will be for some RAAs, and obviously RAAs differ in the way that they've been set up and established, but foster carers adopting it's not a routine thing. So social workers may well be finding themselves in a situation where this is something that they've not experienced before. You need to have really good joint working between all of the people who are all the professionals that are involved in this, and that will include the child social worker. It will include the fostering worker and the fostering service, and again, before RAAs existed, then you might have had adoption and fostering teams that were situated in the same building, having much closer relationships. Now they may well not have particularly close relationships. They may be sort of situated in different places. And it will be really important for the child social worker, the fostering social worker, and the adoption social worker, and probably the family finder from the RAA, all to be able to make sure that they're working together and also kind of giving consistent messages to the foster carers, because otherwise I can potentially see confusion, really, where perhaps wrong advice or wrong information is being given to foster carers that's not being checked out with the rest of the team around them. So I think it is just that really important thing about joint working and making sure that there's good communication between all of the professionals involved.
Well, thank you very much, Elaine. That's a fascinating account, and I can see that there's a lot of things for social workers to think about here. Any final points you want to make?
I mean, I think the most important thing for me is I believe very strongly that for some children, being adopted by their foster carers is absolutely the best outcome for them. And so I would just urge social workers to be open to the idea of that and to really think about kind of whether this might be right for the particular child that they're working with.
Thank you very much, Elaine, for your time. That has been a really interesting conversation. Just to remind listeners that Adoption by Foster Carers, Elaine's book, is available on the CoramBAAF bookshop. So do head over there if you'd like to find out some more information. And once again, Elaine, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks very much, Jo.